Military and war films are common in Hollywood. Some are great, but many are just forgettable. Can Valiant One, intriguingly made by the same creative team responsible for several recent faith-based films, do enough to stand out from the crowd, or will its very familiar genre tropes and heavy use of profanity keep it from finding an audience? I have seen it, so let's talk about it. Inspired by true events, Valiant One is an action thriller from the same creative team behind recent faith-based musicals Journey to Bethlehem and A Week Away, although those earlier films really are not representative for what audiences should expect with this one. The movie forgoes many of the more restrictive conventions of the faith-based genre to strive for a degree of just raw authenticity, but with mostly mixed results. The story's inciting incident involves a crashed helicopter, and the film often just feels equally as grounded, just never quite elevating itself to reach its full potential, while not without some moments of tension and excitement. Valiant One is simply just too hollow and uninventive to offer much more beyond just another conventional military flick. Narratively, Valiant One is very much like a to-the-point thriller that doesn't leave a whole lot of fat on the bone, because within the first 15 minutes of this film, a U.S. helicopter crashes in North Korea, leaving a group of stranded American soldiers and civilians who must travel through hostile territory to reach safety. And the decision to thrust characters directly into the action, I think, does effectively establish this film's brisk pacing, but it also prevents the audience, at least for me personally, from getting just very invested in them outside of the life or death circumstances. It just seems to be a film that banks on viewers already having a built-in patriotic rooting interest in the characters. And as a result, the film just offers a series of, I think, relatively exciting external conflicts, but just undercuts the stakes by never sufficiently establishing any clear internal tensions for these characters. Actor Chase Stokes, who's perhaps best known for his role in the hit show Outer Banks, I think he's a capable actor, and he does do fine in the role of the unexpected leader of the company, but his character is mostly left, I think, undeveloped beyond being established as almost a stereotypical young and cocky hotshot. A midpoint expositional scene does hint at deeper characterization and motivations, but those story threads are just not explored any further. And the same is true of most of the supporting characters. Actress Lana Condor is perhaps this film's standout performance. I think she's great, but her character also just lacks depth. I think as a result, I found that there is just a degree of hollowness to this story in that it doesn't always provide enough compelling human drama to infuse the more intermittent action sequences with meaning beyond just sort of combat spectacle. The film's plot itself is ripe for very edge of your seat tension, and I think to its credit, the film does deliver on this potential at times. Valiant One is at its best when it demonstrates restraint, I think using silence and anticipation to build tension, such as what I think is a very effective early scene in which one of the party members attempts to surrender to the enemy and thus reveal the company's hidden position, or a later moment where characters must attempt to diffuse a very dangerous situation without allowing it to erupt into violence. Unfortunately, the filmmakers just don't always showcase such restraint. For example, in one scene, the heroes must traverse a sprawling field, temporarily abandoning their cover to reach shelter, and it just seems to be the perfect setup to establish very breath-holding tension, but then it's almost inexplicably set against a soundtrack of just blaring music that diffuses any tension from the moment. And a similar approach is taken then to the ensuing firefight. The film frequently takes a sort of rock'em sock'em action flick approach to a story that I personally think would have likely been better served more as a slow burn thriller. And there's the construction of some of these scenes has the vibe more of a military recruitment commercial, which I believe may well have been some of the intention, rather than fitting the more grounded, realistic tone that I think the film otherwise appears to be striving for. I should say too that despite coming from the same creative team behind several recent more explicitly faith-based films, Valiant One is more a patriotic story than it is a religious one. There are a few brief moments of faith, such as one dying man reciting the Lord's Prayer, and I think just some general redemptive themes of self-sacrifice, but the faith elements in this always remain more on the fringe of the story. Also, the use of very heavy language and profanity may also be a deterrent from some Christian audiences. I think the film attempts to authentically capture the experience of the characters, and I do think the profanity is certainly more understandable in a high-stakes high-stakes military drama than it is in something like a raunchy comedy. And there is like a degree of like truthfulness in Valiant one that is often lacked in like the more sanitized stories of faith and heroism. At the same time, by the end, I did feel that the profanity became a sort of crutch, just like a shorthand way to communicate the raw and gritty tone, and for me, it became more distracting than it was immersive. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this, like I said, there is quite a bit, most of it coming with the language, because there is heavy profanity all throughout this film. By my count, I got about 91 F words, as well as about 31 uses of the S word, and like 5 to 10 kind of other minor profanities or crude words, as well as God's name gets kind of used at least 5 times. As far as violence, several men do die in like a vehicle crash, which leaves them kind of like burnt with bloody faces. There are characters that are shot in the head with like a spray of blood coming out the back, as well as others that like, take bullets to the arm and to the chest, which does cause like a fair amount of blood to come out. For sexuality, the only thing that stood out to me is there is sort of a scene where 2 men are arguing, which causes another character like playfully to remark, "You guys should get a room." As far as themes, worldview, things going on beneath the surface of this, kind of some opening title cards to this film declare, heroes aren't born, they are made. I think Hollywood is full of heroic characters, but arguably nowhere is heroism like more on full, cinematic display than in these sort of true life inspired military films. I think in that way, Valiant one is very much like a pro-military story, even as it resists kind of depicting its characters as token kind of Hollywood idealization. An essential idea in this film is that like valor is only forged through tension and conflict, as men and women rise to the occasion to do what must be done, even at great personal cost. And Captain Edward Brockman, who is a Chase Stokes character, is not prepared to lead the mission, but when leadership and like the safety of his company is thrust upon him, there's just no time to like waver or resist. I think he's not like innately heroic or self-sacrificing at the beginning of this film, but is ultimately shaped into sort of the valiant one by the end. And an interesting sort of like visual motif throughout this movie involves a pistol that has several like engraved names upon it, which is explained to be like an heirloom passed down through several generations of men who have served in active duty. And Brockman himself receives the gun after the like selfless sacrifice of its former owner. And then like at several points throughout the film, you see him kind of contemplating the gun, which almost functions as like a sort of metaphorical representation just of like the sacrifice required by the military and like the legacy they leave behind. And from like a Christian perspective, the theme probably most echoes just the teaching in scripture in John 15, says, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." So, in the end, I think there will always be a place in Hollywood to showcase the valor of real-life heroes who put their life on the line to make noble sacrifices and preserve our freedom. I think Valiant one is not a film without any merit. I think it does offer some entertaining thrills and I think redemptive themes, but it just simply doesn't offer enough to like, distinguish itself as a cinematic experience. It lacks the like immersive cinematography or spectacle of many other like more mainstream action war films, but also the explicit like faith elements that I think would make the like heavy profanity more palpable for Christian audiences not accustomed to that kind of content. But most of all, for me, I think it just lacks the human element to elevate it in a very crowded genre. But hey, I would love to hear what you think. If you go check out this film, maybe if you enjoyed it more than I did, don't be shy. Jump into the comment section. Let's have a conversation about it. If you haven't done so too, encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a Collider. Got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. Would love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.